They truly thought you were inconsequential. They genuinely believed you were someone who could be replaced at a moment's notice, a passing face in the crowd of their lives. But look around now. The deep, heavy silence you've left behind is thundering a truth that no amount of words from you ever could. Think back to all the times you poured out your very best, your sincere efforts, your precious time, your earnest thoughts and prayers, only to be treated as if you were entirely transparent, as if your essential kindness was just an expected amenity, like a convenience they were owed, as if your sheer presence had zero weight on the reality of their atmosphere. But the profound truth, the one that's now being screamed by your absence, is this: you were never simply just there. Your arrival was not a fluke or a coincidence. You were from the very start a divine placement, a specific, intentional assignment sent from the highest heaven itself. They failed to perceive this when you were present. They couldn't feel the weight of your spiritual covering until the very moment you decided to step away. It was only when your departure extinguished a light they took for granted that the true reckoning began. Now, they find themselves stumbling blindly in the dark, attempting to navigate a sudden, unexpected spiritual gloom. They are slowly, painfully realizing that the loss they incurred was not merely the departure of a person, it was the severing of a vital, divine connection. This powerful message, however, is not aimed at the vast, noisy crowd. It is delivered specifically to the select few, those individuals who functioned as a secret blessing, working quietly behind the scenes, yet were openly and unfairly rejected in the spotlight of public life or social circles. You never once needed a huge platform, a fancy title, or a crowd of followers to subtly but fundamentally shift the entire atmosphere around them. Your spirit, your very essence, was the silent mechanism that did the vital work. Your quiet, consistent prayers were the unseen mortar that constructed walls of spiritual protection they weren't even aware existed. And in the face of all that unseen service, they still chose to treat you as if you were utterly disposable, a temporary convenience to be used up and tossed aside. Yet, something significant has irrevocably changed. The entire spiritual air they breathe has grown perceptibly heavier. The deep-seated, inexplicable peace they once relied on has completely vanished. They are now, whether they like it or not, compelled to face the single, unavoidable truth they desperately wished to deny. The chosen one is gone. And the vacuum created by that one absence is ushering in a dramatic, undeniable spiritual drought. This is because when you ultimately made the decision to walk away, heaven's protective covering walked out with you. This is the key. You didn't lose the fight. You didn't fail in your mission. You were, in fact, removed by a specific divine order, carefully protected, strategically shielded, and most importantly, repositioned for your next assignment. And those very individuals who so casually mistreated you, they are now learning one of life's most difficult, hard-earned lessons. Not every blessing that shows up is replaceable. Chosen one. If the truth of this message resonates deeply within your spirit right now, I encourage you to affirm this reality. Acknowledge it in the comments below. Let it be known, you are the one who left the 99 behind, and they will never again feel complete, never find that elusive peace without the essential one that heaven intentionally placed with them. And if you haven't done so already, please hit that like button and subscribe. Ensure this vital message finds its way to every other chosen one who has been painfully misunderstood, unfairly mistreated, and is now, as we speak, being elevated to their next great level. Because what is rapidly approaching, what's coming next for you, is a profound shift in the spiritual landscape that they simply never saw coming. Are you truly prepared for the overwhelming reality of it? They were foolishly waiting for something grand, something ostentatious and spectacular. They envisioned a hero who would dramatically announce their arrival with an abundance of visible power, impressive titles, and public recognition. But the divine doesn't typically operate according to those superficial rules. When heaven genuinely intends to bring about a deep, lasting shift in an atmosphere, it rarely dispatches a celebrity or a showman. Instead, it strategically sends a servant. And in this very specific scenario, that servant was you. You didn't burst into their lives with booming, grand speeches. You didn't attempt to forcibly impose your wisdom or spiritual guidance onto anyone. You simply showed up, your heart genuinely open, your spirit carefully aligned, completely ready to give freely without the slightest expectation of receiving anything tangible in return. But their spiritual sight was dimmed. They utterly failed to recognize the sheer spiritual power and profound grace standing directly in front of them. Why is this such a common oversight? Because the world, with its focus on the superficial, is essentially blind to quiet greatness. They are only capable of perceiving what shines visibly and sparkles brightly on the outside. But heaven, on the other hand, deliberately wraps its most precious, greatest treasures in the cloak of simplicity and humility. While they were obsessively running around, chasing after noise, drama, and validation, you were quietly and diligently building an environment of peace. While they were anxiously searching for leaders on elevated stages, you were effectively leading through the humble power of your consistent, compassionate actions, your unwavering patience, and your quiet, intercessory prayers conducted in the hidden background. You were carrying a vital light that they were far too perpetually distracted to ever clearly see. Yet, it was that very light, your presence, that was quietly sustaining their entire environment. Every challenging conversation you patiently listened to, every crucial moment where you deliberately chose compassion over your own ego, every tense situation where you made the conscious decision to remain calm while everyone else completely lost control, these were all powerful, yet entirely spiritual, acts of warfare that they never once perceived or understood. You functioned as a crucial barrier between impending chaos and enduring peace, but they tragically mistook your serene calm for a lack of strength, or worse, for weakness. They genuinely believed you were just being nice or accommodating, when in reality, you were deeply interceding on their behalf. They dismissed you as too sensitive, when you were actually powerfully discerning the spirits and atmosphere. They thought you were passive, yet you were silently carrying spiritual battles that they would never have possessed the strength or maturity to survive. This is because the divine purposefully designed you to be a quiet storm, soft and unassuming in outward appearance, yet absolutely unstoppable in the execution of your divine purpose. They were anxiously waiting for a loud, dramatic warrior brandishing a sword, but the Almighty strategically sent them a peacemaker, armed with a shield of faith. And precisely because you didn't arrive with a fanfare of applause and recognition, they systematically overlooked and dismissed you. But understand this, chosen one, this kind of invisibility is an essential part of the divine mission. God frequently hides his most powerful vessels in plain sight, only fully revealing their true spiritual weight and immense value when they are intentionally removed from the equation. Your entire purpose for being there was never to impress them or seek their validation. Your assignment was, in fact, to fundamentally transform the spiritual atmosphere, regardless of whether they ever had the insight to notice or not. But now, as the undeniable reality sets in, now that you are truly gone, everything around them feels markedly different. The sense of pervasive peace has noticeably lifted. The sustaining light has dramatically dimmed. The spiritual stability they once took so casually for granted is now visibly crumbling. And it is only now that they are slowly, painfully beginning to grasp that your presence among them was never ordinary. It was strategic. It was divine, because the intricate and often surprising way God chooses to utilize his chosen vessels is never what people conventionally expect. He intentionally hides diamonds within the dusty earth. He places vital spiritual pillars inside the very individuals they dismiss as utterly disposable. You were a powerful pillar, quietly holding up fragile spiritual structures they were completely unaware were at the brink of collapse. Yet you never once screamed for credit or demanded recognition. You simply stood firmly and quietly in the shadows, consistently and diligently doing the essential work heaven had assigned you. And now that your critical post is starkly empty, the spiritual cracks are rapidly showing. The entire foundation is noticeably shaking, and the profound silence you've left behind is now shouting the truth far louder and more effectively than your spoken words ever could have. But here is the unexpected twist, the one they definitely didn't see approaching. Your absence was not the definitive end of your purpose. It was instead the dramatic, necessary unveiling of the next chapter. Because the very thing they so carelessly discarded as common or mundane is about to be spectacularly revealed as the one essential element they literally could not survive without. Chosen one, stay connected to this message because in the very next moment, you will fully comprehend why the enormous void you have left behind is not merely an emotional or social space, but a deeply significant spiritual vacuum. And the sheer weight of that profound truth is poised to change absolutely everything in their spiritual reality. While you were physically present, everything in their lives seemed to proceed effortlessly. The atmosphere felt refreshingly light. Relationships flowed with ease. Opportunities seemed to spontaneously open up for them, but not a single one of them truly grasped the underlying reason. They casually dismissed it as pure coincidence. They genuinely believed life was just passing through a particularly good season. However, what they consistently failed to perceive was the powerful, hidden force holding absolutely everything steady. It was you, your constant presence, your deeply rooted spiritual alignment. You were the indispensable anchor beneath the surface, diligently working to prevent everything from drifting into irreversible chaos. You weren't loud or boastful about this immense role. You certainly didn't advertise your prayers or spiritual efforts, but while they were busy laughing and relaxing, you were fervently interceding. While they were consumed with complaining, you were providing spiritual covering. While they were desperately seeking external validation, you were seeking heaven's favor on their behalf. You were the invisible stabilizer, the quiet spiritual shield that deliberately absorbed the spiritual storms they weren't even aware were rapidly approaching. But now, in the immediate aftermath of your departure, because you are no longer there to silently absorb and soften the inevitable blows, the spiritual impact is direct and unforgiving. The minor arguments they once managed to easily shake off now linger and fester indefinitely. The small conflicts that previously resolved themselves effortlessly now relentlessly escalate into major problems. The pervasive peace that used to simply exist has now completely evaporated. Because the simple truth is this: you weren't just physically present, you were actively maintaining a crucial spiritual order, and they never truly noticed your essential function until the moment you were definitively gone. Suddenly, the very air in their environment feels thick and heavy. Simple, everyday conversations now inexplicably devolve into tension-filled, awkward silences. The harmonious flow they once implicitly relied on has abruptly transformed into grinding friction. It's not that the entire world instantly changed. It is that the protective spiritual covering was unilaterally removed. You must grasp this concept. When the divine places a chosen one into a specific space, that individual immediately becomes an atmosphere carrier. You don't merely walk into a room. You fundamentally shift the entire spiritual dynamic of that room. Your very presence inherently brings a deep, necessary divine alignment. But when the pervasive spirit of dishonor is introduced into that environment, heaven will inevitably withdraw what it once graciously allowed to remain. And that is the precise mechanism that is playing out right now in their reality. They never once thought your absence would fundamentally matter, because they never took the time to truly comprehend what your presence was spiritually providing. They were too preoccupied with judging your outer simplicity and humility. All the while, they were willfully ignoring the profound spiritual authority you quietly carried. But now, the sheer weight of your absence is undeniable. The spiritual balance has been severely disrupted. The lightness of grace has morphed into a dense, oppressive fog. And they are finally, begrudgingly beginning to realize that you were not merely helpful. You were fundamentally essential. Every physical location you prayed over, every relationship you sincerely attempted to protect, every difficult situation you handled with deliberate grace, they are now all progressively unraveling, because the critical thread holding it all together was undeniably you. They are now intensely feeling the gaping spiritual holes. They are acutely noticing the dramatic cracks in their foundation. But this unfolding is not happening because you pronounced some kind of curse upon them. It is because you were, in a spiritual sense, blessing them in ways they simply lacked the spiritual maturity to ever clearly see or appreciate. Now this heavy silence is serving as their most effective, if unwelcome, teacher. Every time they are confronted with a new difficult obstacle, your definitive absence whispers a sharp lesson. Every moment of unexpected chaos is a direct, undeniable reflection of the peace you once diligently sustained. You never desired to be the central focus of attention. You genuinely only wanted to serve your divine assignment. But now, the substantial vacancy you left behind is the loudest, most persistent voice in their environment. They used to carelessly dismiss your concerns by saying, "It's not that serious." Now, every unfolding consequence feels deadly serious and unavoidable. They used to openly mock your spiritual discernment. Now, they desperately wish they possessed your clarity and foresight. They used to constantly label you as too much to handle. But now, they are metaphorically suffocating in a profound spiritual drought that you use to consistently hydrate with the simple power of your presence. And here is the thing they still haven't fully grasped. Your absence is not a punitive measure. It is an undeniable revelation. It is the divine, in his wisdom, teaching through the power of distance what they stubbornly refuse to learn through the convenience of your proximity. But let me give you a serious warning. Chosen one, this is only the initial phase of the consequences they are about to experience. Because when heaven makes the decision to remove a consecrated vessel, heaven simultaneously removes the vital spiritual access that came with it. Stay focused with me, because in the next crucial moment, we will fully uncover why the act of rejecting a chosen one doesn't just result in the closing of a single door. It fundamentally shifts the entire spiritual atmosphere into a prolonged season of heavy consequence. And that is precisely where the spiritual weight of their decision becomes entirely inescapable. When they chose to dishonor you, they operated under the assumption that they were merely dismissing a fallible person. But in the unseen spiritual realm, they were actively dismissing a profound divine connection. They perceived you as nothing more than a well-meaning person trying to offer assistance. But heaven viewed you as a carrier of vital solutions to the very problems they had been earnestly praying about. They failed to realize that their rejection of you was not simply a personal offense against you. It was a serious spiritual misstep, one that heaven would most certainly not overlook or ignore. You were not present in their lives by mere chance or accident. You were a sent vessel, an answer to their needs, thoughtfully wrapped in the cloak of humility. And when they consciously chose to dishonor what God had specifically sent to bless them, they inadvertently activated a powerful spiritual law they didn't even know existed, the law of consequence. This is not human revenge, nor is it merely karma, but a fixed divine principle. Because when you deliberately reject something the Almighty has sent to bless you, you are not simply closing the door on a person's involvement. You are decisively closing the door on a significant move of God in your life. That is the fundamental reason why everything that once flowed with effortless grace suddenly began to feel aggressively forced. That's why the doors that were once opening without struggle are now firmly sealed shut. This is not a matter of pure bad luck or misfortune. It is directly about the fact that dishonor has created a severe spiritual blockade. Where deep peace once naturally resided, pervasive tension now firmly reigns. Where there was once clear divine alignment, crippling confusion has completely taken over. This is not because you have actively wished any harm upon them, but because your presence was a living spiritual covering, and they themselves, with their own hands and attitudes, tragically tore it down. They remained utterly oblivious that mocking your quiet prayers was, in fact, mocking their own protection. They never once realized that their public and subtle disrespect was not truly impacting you. It was directly clashing with the will and presence of heaven. And when that dishonor reaches a critical tipping point, God inevitably steps in, not with loud, dramatic warnings, and not with the sound of thunder from the skies, but with a palpable, profound silence. A holy silence that systematically removes grace from those environments and relationships that stubbornly refuse to genuinely respect his chosen vessels. This entire situation is not centered on your ego or the need to be right. It is solely about spiritual order, and the profound force of dishonor disrupts this divine order in ways the purely natural mind is incapable of comprehending. You see, God's chosen ones are intended to be active extensions of his hands on earth. Rejecting them is spiritually akin to carelessly slapping away the very hand that is attempting to feed and sustain you. The result is not immediate, spectacular destruction. It is a slow, steady unraveling, a gradual and painful exposure of exactly what happens when the spiritual covering is conclusively gone. What was once perfectly protected suddenly becomes frighteningly vulnerable. What was once consistently blessed now slowly becomes barren and unproductive, and those individuals who once possessed a feeling of being invincible are beginning to feel the profound cracks forming beneath their feet. But here is the one part they never anticipated. The consequence is not designed for the purpose of revenge. It is strategically designed for the purpose of revelation. God intentionally allows environments that reject His chosen to fully experience the immense void so that they may finally see the undeniable value they once so carelessly ignored. But the longer the grip of their pride holds on to the reins of their reality, the heavier and more protracted the consequence inevitably becomes. They believed they could execute their dishonor quietly, whispering judgments behind your back, subtly dismissing your immense value with seemingly minor acts of disrespect. But dishonor, regardless of how discreetly it is packaged, speaks volumes in the spiritual realm. It sends an unmistakable message directly to heaven that says, "We do not value what you have sent us," and heaven, in its spiritual economy, responds accordingly. The resources suddenly begin to dry up. The essential piece completely evaporates. The opportunities aggressively stall. This happens not out of spite or a desire for petty punishment, but as a direct mirror of their own internal rejection. They themselves deliberately broke the spiritual bridge. They chose to sever the vital connection, and now the very spiritual source that was consistently sustaining them has been decisively rerouted elsewhere. But they failed to anticipate this one crucial fact. The blessing they so cavalierly mistreated is now actively being positioned in new places that will undoubtedly honor and appreciate it, and the sharp contrast between the abundance you now enjoy and what they decisively lost will become a constant, unavoidable reminder that dishonor is an incredibly expensive spiritual choice. Very expensive indeed. Chosen one, you must fully internalize this fact. You were never at any point the actual cause of their downfall. You were fundamentally the opportunity they completely mismanaged. And while they sit squarely in the growing tension of their own poor choices, the Almighty is actively writing a brand new, glorious chapter for you, one where the immense value of your contribution will never again be questioned or minimized. But before we fully turn the page to that next chapter, you need to be consciously aware of the silent, immense power you consistently carried on their behalf, because while they were solely focused on noise and drama, you were quietly moving spiritual mountains in secret. Stay with me, because in this final critical moment, I will show you precisely how you were dramatically transforming lives behind the scenes, without them ever truly realizing the extent of your spiritual labor. You never needed a microphone to amplify your voice. You never required a spotlight to illuminate your actions. Your sacred mission was never, ever about earning temporary applause. It was entirely about achieving deep spiritual alignment. You were strategically placed in their lives not for their entertainment, but for their genuine transformation. And you executed this vital mission in the most potent way possible, silently and effectively. While they frantically sought external validation, you were diligently seeking intercession. While they aggressively fought for superficial attention, you were powerfully fighting in the spirit realm for their enduring peace. They never once witnessed the intense spiritual battles you fought while on your knees in private. They never once heard the fervent prayers you whispered when absolutely no one was watching. But heaven heard you. Heaven saw it all. And because of your quiet obedience, the spiritual tide inevitably shifted in their favor. You didn't stand prominently on a public stage. You purposefully stood in the spiritual gaps. The profound cracks they carelessly ignored, you sealed them firmly with your prayers. The deep spiritual wounds they mocked and laughed off, you covered them tenderly in spiritual balm. Every crucial place that was on the verge of breaking apart, you were quietly and diligently holding together. But they never truly noticed because your spiritual strength was deliberately hidden. Your profound impact was intentionally veiled. That, my friends, is the unmistakable mark of the chosen ones. You do not enter a room with the sole objective of being seen by others. You walk in, and the entire atmosphere immediately bends and conforms to your presence. even if no one in the natural realm can fully articulate why the change occurred. You were the silent force that consistently shifted heavy energies. You calmed spiritual storms long before they had a chance to escalate into disaster. You turned developing chaos into a pervasive calm with merely a subtle word, a meaningful glance, or sometimes simply by your powerful presence alone. But now that you have definitively stepped away from your post, the spiritual dominoes are rapidly falling. The crucial conversations that once flowed with such ease now feel stilted, forced, and incredibly awkward. The sense of peace that used to simply manifest has now become a manufactured and exceedingly fragile commodity. They don't have a clue why everything feels so profoundly off, but you know the reason. You are the invisible shield, the unannounced intercessor, the one who tirelessly fought the unseen spiritual battles in silence so that others could comfortably enjoy peace. Without ever once realizing the immense spiritual cost to you, you were the hidden reason that specific spiritual disasters never actually materialized. You were the source behind the consistent flow of opportunities that kept coming their way. This was not because you ever boastfully bragged about your efforts, but because you faithfully stood in the necessary spiritual gap for them. But the spirit of dishonor possesses a sharp way of unmasking what was deliberately hidden. They ridiculed your keen discernment. They laughed off your spiritual sensitivity. But now they are frantically searching for that intangible something that is critically missing. And it is the persistent echo of your absence that keeps resonating louder and louder in their every failure. They scornfully called you too serious, but now they are painfully drowning in the very same chaos you used to silently absorb and neutralize. They confidently declared you overthink and worry too much, but now they are making reckless, catastrophic decisions with absolutely no one left to bring much-needed spiritual balance and clear counsel. They fundamentally underestimated you because they never truly saw the immense spiritual weight you were quietly carrying. And let me tell you a secret. The enemy knew your power. The entire spiritual realm was fully aware of your assignment. That is precisely why you were consistently attacked so often. That is why you felt the frequent crushing heaviness, the deep exhaustion, and the relentless, unseen spiritual resistance. Because while they lived their lives in careless comfort, you were actively fighting off spiritual storms that had your name and theirs written all over the potential victory. But they never knew the truth. Because true, faithful servants do not publicly announce their most intense battles. They simply win them quietly and effectively. And now that you are definitively gone, they are finally beginning to see the truth. You were not merely present. You were the vital force holding the entire spiritual structure of their lives together. Every single chain you broke in the secret of your prayers, every oppressive atmosphere you purified with your consistent intercession, was a difficult battle they never had to personally confront. But now, the entire atmosphere feels intensely heavier. Their regular conversations are strained and lacking genuine connection. Their unity is completely fractured. This is all because the one who silently and faithfully held it all together has been strategically removed. And here is the core mystery they are currently struggling to solve. How could someone who seemed so quiet, so unassuming, so normal, possibly leave behind such a devastatingly massive spiritual void? It is because heaven deliberately placed you there as a strategic spiritual anchor, not for personal recognition, but purely for their divine preservation. But when the destructive force of dishonor intersects with a serious divine assignment, God will always, without fail, protect his chosen vessel. And sometimes that necessary divine protection manifests in the form of removal. Chosen one, you were never their actual problem. You were from the very beginning their indispensable spiritual shield. But now that the protective shield is permanently gone, the impact of the spiritual blow is direct and immediate. And every subtle ripple created by your absence is now exposing a deeper, frightening truth they were entirely unprepared to face. But we are not finished yet. Because in the next critical moment, you will fully grasp why the force of humility is the only remaining key that possesses the power to reverse the vast spiritual destruction that their dishonor has wrought. The crucial question now remains: will they manage to find that essential humility in time to make a difference? Or will the overwhelming weight of their entrenched pride keep them perpetually trapped in a debilitating cycle of consequences they tragically brought upon themselves. There is a singularly powerful key that is capable of unlocking every single door that pride has firmly sealed shut, a force so immense and potent that it can miraculously reverse severe spiritual droughts, mend deeply fractured atmospheres, and fully restore everything that their conscious dishonor utterly destroyed. But this force is not a clever worldly strategy. It is not some intricate predetermined plan. It is simply and profoundly humility, the single effective way to heal the deep spiritual chasm that has been created, is to kneel in the place where their towering ego once defiantly stood. Humility is far more than just a surface apology. It is not a shallow, meaningless "I'm sorry" offered merely to check a box and move on. True humility is a deep, profound internal surrender. It represents the extraordinary courage required to genuinely look at what they carelessly overlooked. It is the difficult, painful willingness to openly admit, "I was spiritually blind. I severely misjudged. I fundamentally dishonored what heaven intentionally sent to bless me." And that specific, high level of raw honesty is exceedingly rare in today's world, because the world relentlessly teaches people to fight viciously for their pride, to stubbornly double down on their own flawed opinions, and to never, ever admit they were wrong. But heaven simply does not operate within the limitations of human pride. Heaven consistently moves within the principle of humility. When they chose to reject you, it wasn't just you they abruptly closed off. It was the dynamic flow of God's active hand moving specifically through your life and presence. And every single ounce of blessing and spiritual favor that demonstrably dried up immediately following your absence is now shouting this single, powerful truth: pride will always inevitably bankrupt what honor was meant to abundantly multiply. But here is the incredible beauty in the divine economy. Restoration is genuinely never out of reach. It is constantly one crucial decision away. A single genuine moment of humility possesses the spiritual power to unlock what stubborn pride has successfully kept bound in chains for potentially years. Humility functions as the painfully honest mirror that no one ever truly wants to face. It dramatically reveals those hidden, deeply flawed parts of us that the ego has desperately tried to conceal and protect. It relentlessly confronts all the convenient self-illusions. And for those who actively mistreated you, it will require every ounce of their remaining spiritual strength to finally see the profound truth that was hidden in plain sight. They will be forced to swallow their pride and genuinely admit that quiet, unassuming presence I so easily dismissed was, in reality, a divine and constant spiritual covering. That soft, non-judgmental voice I mocked was, in fact, a prophetic guide sent for my protection. That person I repeatedly thought was too much was strategically sent to hold my entire life together. But here is the major catch. Humility will demand the immediate cost of their pride, and not everyone possesses the courage or willingness to pay that immensely high price. If they stubbornly choose the path of pride, the spiritual weight will persistently continue. The massive void will only deepen further, and the destructive ripple effects of their past dishonor will keep aggressively reverberating through every area of their lives. But if genuine humility manages to break through their arrogance, spiritual healing will immediately rush in to mend the damage. Because God does not withhold the profound blessing of restoration out of any sense of vengeance. He patiently waits for spiritual alignment. He waits for hearts to fully bow down in surrender, for spiritual eyes to clearly open to the truth, and for hands to finally release their stubborn, paralyzing grip of arrogance. Once the necessary humility successfully steps in, the spiritual blockages automatically begin to dissolve. What once felt unbearably heavy becomes refreshingly light. What was previously spiritually stuck immediately begins to flow again, because the Word of God confirms that God actively resists the proud, but grants overwhelming grace to the humble. Chosen one, you are emphatically not the one who needs to beg for recognition or validation. You were faithfully obedient. You successfully completed your assigned mission. But now, it is undeniably their turn to make a fundamental choice. And that single choice will definitively determine whether they continue to languish in a painful spiritual drought or finally step into a long overdue season of glorious restoration. But here is the final revelation they haven't yet grasped. Humility is not merely about fixing the mistakes of the past. It is, in its essence, about unlocking a future of spiritual blessing they never even knew was possible. Because when they finally choose to honor what they once so foolishly rejected, the very heavens respond with a multiplication of blessings. The profound, sustaining peace you once carried will return to their environment. The blessings and opportunities that were previously delayed are suddenly released in abundance. But this entire restoration process hinges entirely on one single act of genuine courage: humility. So what will their ultimate decision be? Will they finally bow down in humility, or will they spiritually break under the weight of their consequence? The time for playing games and spiritual pretense is completely over. The painful waiting period has unequivocally exposed the truth of your value. Now, only genuine humility possesses the potential to rewrite the resulting outcome. But before we definitively close this life-changing chapter, there is one last, monumental revelation you absolutely must hear. Chosen one. Because you're necessary. Departure was never the final conclusion of your story. It was instead the dramatic and unavoidable beginning of your divine elevation. Listen to me carefully in this final, powerful moment. They may have emphatically rejected you. Yes, they deeply underestimated your spiritual power, blatantly ignored your contribution and treated you as if you were easily replaceable. But heaven never once let go of you. What for them was a casual discard, for the Almighty was a profound promotion and repositioning. They may have perceived your departure as the definitive end of your influence, but your strategic absence is in reality the grand opening of a heavenly stage where your unique purpose will now be fully and completely honored. What once so easily ignored you will now be forced to profoundly feel the sheer weight of your mission. And the very people who once carelessly pushed you aside will now be forced to witness firsthand how God is actively elevating you to platforms and places where your immense value will not just be seen, but it will be enthusiastically celebrated and revered. The massive spiritual void they are currently feeling today is not designed to be a punishment. It is a resounding echo. It is the powerful echo of the undeniable impact your quiet presence left in the spiritual structure of their lives. They were painfully forced to learn what you had been diligently holding together in absolute silence. But you are currently being prepared for completely new spiritual dimensions, where your essential essence will never again be misunderstood, where your profound light will never be dimmed by human inadequacy, and where your vital mission will never be actively sabotaged. You were never created with the intention of fitting in. You were strategically created to shift entire spiritual atmospheres, to actively open monumental doors that ordinary, spiritually limited people cannot even perceive. And now, you are standing on the precipice of being positioned on platforms where every single word you speak will carry significant, eternal weight. They mistakenly believed that your physical departure would permanently silence your influence. But in the spiritual realms of heaven, your voice never once stopped resonating. Remember this always, chosen one. You are significantly more than what they were able to superficially see. You are profoundly more than what they were capable of spiritually understanding. You are a consecrated vessel, a fine-tuned instrument, a formidable spiritual weapon in the hands of the Almighty, and the time for attempting to hide your brilliant light is officially over. This is only the nascent beginning of your public divine unveiling. The limited world has not yet fully witnessed the immense power you carry within you, but very soon, monumental doors will swing open. Doors that exclusively open only for those who have faithfully endured the immense weight of being profoundly misunderstood. That is precisely why I implore you now. Lift your head high, strengthen and affirm your spirit. What God is about to miraculously do with and through you will be entirely impossible for anyone to ignore or deny. If this powerful word has ignited a flame deep within your spirit, take a moment right now and write in the comments, "I was the blessing they foolishly rejected." Declare it boldly, because your powerful testimony will awaken and encourage many others who were also unjustly dishonored, but are now standing on the verge of living out their own supernatural restoration. And before you close this window, please be sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share this message widely. Because this narrative is not solely your personal story. It is the universal story of every chosen one that the self-absorbed world simply did not possess the spiritual capacity to value. Get ready now. What is rapidly approaching is your undeniable season of public recognition and vindication. Your sacred mission does not terminate here. Your divine assignment is, in reality, just beginning its next most glorious phase. And this time, no one, absolutely no one, will be able to dim the intensity of your magnificent light.